Story begins 5 years after David Burrows was convicted of murdering his young son, Matthew. He remains imprisoned at Briggs Penitentiary, still insisting he is innocent. Matthew was found beaten to death in his bedroom, while David slept nearby, and the tragedy destroyed his family. Haunted by guilt and convinced everyone is better off without him, David has spent years refusing visits from loved ones. Everything changes when his sister-in-law, Rachel, unexpectedly arrives at the prison. She secretly shows him a photograph taken at an amusement park by an old classmate. In the background stands a boy who looks remarkably like Matthew. David notices what appears to be the same birthmark his son had and becomes convinced the impossible may be true. Rachel admits she never fully believed he killed Matthew and thinks the picture deserves investigation. Before they can discuss it further, prison officer Ted Wesson abruptly ends the visit. David immediately tries to pursue the lead, but Ted Wesson reacts violently, assaulting him and placing him in solitary confinement. Meanwhile, prison warden Philip McKenzie takes an unusual interest in the situation. Though David was convicted years earlier, McKenzie seems troubled by the new development. He travels to meet members of David's family and learns Rachel has reopened questions surrounding Matthew's death. Back in prison, David receives access to Matthew's case file. As he reviews the evidence and remembers the trial, doubts begin to emerge. A key witness claimed to have seen him acting suspiciously before Matthew's body was discovered, testimony that helped secure his conviction. At the same time, Rachel quietly starts investigating on her own. She contacts former colleagues and begins digging into the witness's past, discovering that the woman changed her identity shortly after testifying against David. As David finds himself targeted inside prison, a notorious inmate named Ross Sumner is suddenly assigned to his work detail and attacks him without warning. David survives the assault, but it becomes increasingly clear someone wants him silenced. Wesson repeatedly ignores prison protocol and appears determined to make David's life miserable. After another meeting with Rachel, David warns her that if Matthew is alive, powerful and dangerous people may be involved. While David faces escalating threats behind bars, one night, Wesson claims he's escorting David to the infirmary, but instead attempts to murder him. Armed with a knife, he corners David and admits he accepted money to kill him. David escapes long enough to raise the alarm, but prison staff eventually subdue him. Another officer reports seeing Wesson plant evidence on David, confirming suspicions that someone inside the prison is manipulating events. David tells McKenzie that Wesson confessed to being paid, convincing the warden that a larger conspiracy may exist. Realizing David may never survive long enough to uncover the truth, McKenzie decides to take an extraordinary risk. Together with his son, Adam, a prison officer, McKenzie devises a plan to help David escape. Disguised in Adam's uniform, David is secretly escorted out of the facility. The plan nearly succeeds until Wesson discovers the deception and triggers a prison lock-on. Forced to improvise, David takes McKenzie hostage at gunpoint while the warden publicly plays along. The pair manage to break through security and flee in McKenzie's truck. News of the escape quickly reaches Cheryl, Rachel, and the rest of David's family. Police launch a massive manhunt and soon corner the truck using roadblocks and spike strips. Surrounded by police, David holds a gun to Philip's head while negotiators try to end the standoff peacefully. Detective Wayne Say contacts him, but David refuses to surrender. He threatens to kill Philip unless police remove the spike strips blocking the road. Despite the officer's hesitation, the road is eventually cleared, allowing David and Philip to speed away. While on the run, David calls Rachel and asks for help. Police continue chasing him, but David manages to evade them. When officers finally stop the truck, Philip emerges alone. David has already escaped and disappears before authorities can find him. Rachel secretly picks him up in a parking garage, and together they head back toward Boston while avoiding police detection. FBI Special Agent Max Williams and Agent Sarah Greer are assigned to the case. Greer has recently been offered promotion, but she joins Williams in tracking down the escaped prisoner. Their investigation quickly reveals suspicious details surrounding David's imprisonment and escape. Visitor records show Rachel visited David shortly before he fled, while security footage from the prison has mysteriously vanished. Meanwhile, David's family struggles with the fallout. Cheryl learns Rachel has been secretly meeting David and is furious that she kept it hidden. At the same time, prison officer Ted Wesson begins to panic. He knows he failed to kill David and fears the people behind the conspiracy will come after him. Following advice from Ross Sumner, he sent his wife and daughter away for their safety. Rachel and David continue investigating the mystery surrounding Matthew. Their search leads them directly to Wesson's home. David confronts him and demands to know where Matthew is. Wesson appears terrified, claiming he is trapped by dangerous people. Before David can get any useful information, a gunshot rings out. Rachel rushes inside and discovers Wesson dead on the floor. David insists Wesson took his own life. The pair barely escape before FBI agents arrive at the scene. Greer spots Rachel's car leaving the area, giving investigators their first solid lead. Back at the prison, Williams searches David's cell for clues. He begins suspecting that David was not merely an inmate, but a target. This theory gains strength when investigators discover Wesson had been receiving large monthly payments for years from a mysterious company called RH Holdings. As David and Rachel travel toward New York, they discuss the personal failures that haunt them. Rachel reveals that she lost her journalism career after a source involved in one of her investigations died by suicide. The tragedy continues to weigh heavily on her conscience. Wesson's burner phone suddenly rings. David answers and hears the voice of a man connected to the conspiracy. The caller warns him to stop digging into the past. Back at the FBI investigation, Williams discovers a hidden compartment in David's prison cell containing Matthew's case file and a flashlight. The evidence suggests David was investigating witness Hilda Winslow before escaping. Agents begin to believe she may be his next destination. Elsewhere, Rachel contacts her old friend Hayden, who agrees to let them stay at his home. However, after seeing news reports about David, Hayden reviews his security cameras and notices both Rachel and David inside his house. Meanwhile, Adam McKenzie secretly visits Matthew's grave and begins digging it up in the middle of the night. At the same time, the mysterious man who called Wesson is revealed to be a police officer secretly operating inside Cheryl's home. A flashback to July 4th, 2021 shows David Burrows enjoying a holiday celebration with his family before tragedy struck. Rachel attends with Hayden while David and Adam notice a man named Kyle Bergen, the skunk, watching them from a distance. More than a day has passed since David escaped prison. Rachel believes their best chance of proving his innocence is finding Hilda Winslow, the witness whose testimony helped convict him. If she admits she lied in court, David could potentially receive a new trial. Using information linked to Hilda's post office box in New York, David and Rachel travel there, hoping to locate her. The FBI continues investigating. Agents Max Williams and Sarah Greer question Cheryl and her husband about Rachel's involvement with David. At the same time, Philip McKenzie finally reveals the truth behind David's escape to his parents. He explains the possibility that Matthew may still be alive and points out that David was nearly killed twice after seeing the photograph. Lenny confesses that he and Philip secretly buried the baseball bat connected to Matthew's murder years in an attempt to protect David. Elsewhere, Adam continues investigating on his own. After spending the night at Matthew's grave, he contacts someone and requests a meeting. Rachel receives pressure from former editor Jim Dougherty, who sees the potential story unfolding around David's case. At the post office, David manages to obtain Hilda's address through a small deception. However, Rachel soon learns that the FBI already knows they are in New York and will likely be waiting at Hilda's apartment. During this time, Rachel calls Cheryl and reveals the shocking possibility that Matthew could still be alive. Cheryl refuses to believe it and becomes overwhelmed with emotion. She receives comfort from a wealthy woman whose interest in Cheryl seems unusually personal. David and Rachel soon discover FBI agents watching Hilda's building. To help David reach her, Rachel deliberately distracts the authorities and allows herself to be detained. David slips inside the apartment building and confronts Hilda. Though frightened, she finally reveals the truth. Years earlier, a man threatened her and her family, convincing her to testify against David. She says she was manipulated into believing he murdered Matthew. When she describes the man who pressured her, David recognizes him as Skunk, an associate of crime figure Nikki Fisher. As Rachel is questioned by the FBI, Williams realizes she intentionally helped David reach Hilda. Agents close in on David's location. Hilda provides him with an escape route through a fire escape, but the FBI quickly catches up. David flees across rooftops while Greer pursues him. She shoots him in the arm. Trapped on the edge of a building, David refuses to surrender and leaps into a garbage truck below before escaping on foot. Back in Massachusetts, Philip and Lenny confront Adam about exhuming Matthew's grave. Adam reveals he wanted DNA testing to confirm whether the body truly belonged to Matthew. However, when he opened the grave, he discovered the body was gone. Someone had already removed it. The discovery convinces them that powerful people knew the remains would expose the truth and remove the evidence before anyone else could examine it. At Cheryl's fundraiser, Gertrude makes a generous donation and appears supportive. However, after leaving, it becomes clear she is secretly working with the corrupt police officer tied to the conspiracy. David eventually returns to Hayden's apartment, wounded but alive. Rachel is not as fortunate. The FBI arrests her for helping David evade capture and for her alleged role in Wesson's death. Afterward, another revelation emerges when Williams confronts Greer about her actions during the rooftop chase. It is revealed that the two agents are actually father and daughter. Next, on a beach far from the investigation, a woman calls for a boy named Theo. As he turns around, the audience sees that the child is actually Matthew Burrows, alive years after everyone believed he had been murdered. 8 years earlier, Hayden nervously prepares for an important speech while Rachel helps him rehearse. She offers suggestions and corrections, but her advice does little to calm his fear of speaking in front of his demanding mother. In the present, Hayden learns that Rachel has been arrested and threatens to turn David into the authorities. To stop him, David reveals the truth he has been hiding. Matthew is still alive. At the same time, Rachel is processed to jail while agents examine everything she carried with her. Greer finally tells Williams that she may be leaving for a new position in Seattle. Their discussion is interrupted when Hilda is brought in for questioning. She continues protecting David and refuses to explain his motives, but the investigators know she is withholding information. David later tells Hayden that Hilda has agreed to lure Kyle Bergen, known as Skunk, to New York. In exchange, David promises Rachel will no longer be involved. Meanwhile, Philip, Adam, and Lenny re-examine old records connected to Matthew's disappearance. They discover that Cheryl had supposedly been called to the hospital because of a major bus accident on the night Matthew vanished. When Adam verifies the records, he learns no such accident ever occurred. The administrator who confirmed Cheryl's story years earlier was Ronald Dries, Cheryl's current husband. Suspicious, Lenny decides to speak with him. At the hospital, Cheryl meets Lenny before he can find Ronald. Lenny explains that transportation records show no bus crash happened that night. Cheryl refuses to believe Ronald would fabricate such a story, but the revelation clearly unsettles her. Greer studies the photograph recovered from Rachel's purse, but cannot yet understand its significance. Williams receives evidence showing Hilda contacted Skunk, leading agents to bring both individuals in for questioning. Hilda meets Skunk in Washington Square Park, where David is waiting. David corners Skunk, but Skunk suddenly pulls a gun and shoots Hilda in the chest. A struggle follows and Skunk flees. David chases him through nearby alleys and eventually finds him wounded after accidentally shooting himself during the fight. David drags him to an abandoned building and begins forcing answers out of him. Meanwhile, Rachel is unexpectedly released after a mysterious lawyer posts her $1 million bond. Outside the jail, she learns Hayden arranged her release. As David continues pressuring Skunk, the gangster finally breaks and reveals a shocking clue. David should ask his father why Nikki Fisher kidnapped Matthew. Police sirens soon surround the area. Rachel contacts David, and with Hayden secretly diverting officers through a false report, David narrowly escapes capture and joins Rachel. Elsewhere, Philip and Lenny uncover a connection between Ronald and Nikki Fisher through an old Medicare fraud investigation. The discovery raises the possibility that Ronald played a role in Matthew's abduction. Cheryl confronts Ronald about the fake bus accident, but although he denies everything, his behavior suggests he is hiding the truth. David and Rachel decide to travel to Boston to meet Lenny and pursue the new lead. Before leaving, Rachel receives another call from Jim, who still wants her story. At the same time, investigators question Skunk in the hospital, where his claim that David believes Matthew is alive completely changes the direction of the case. While Cheryl showers, Ronald secretly deletes a voicemail from Lenny on her phone. As David and Rachel head toward Boston, Hayden receives a call from his mother, Gertrude Payne. She reveals she knows he has been lying and possesses photographic proof linking him to David. Later, Greer studies Rachel's photograph again and finally notices a young boy with the same birthmark Matthew once had. Realizing what the picture means, she understands that Matthew may truly be alive. As the hour closes, Lenny reviews Liam Fisher's case file when an unseen figure approaches from behind and presses a gun against his head. Next, we see a flashback to 5 years earlier in Switzerland. Authorities investigate the deaths of Nathan and Bridget Bischoff. While searching the property, a detective discovers a hidden space reached by a stepladder. Inside is a young boy named Martin. With no family left, Martin is placed in an orphanage and eventually disappears without a trace. In the present, news of Matthew's kidnapping reaches Interpol, prompting Detective Mueller to revisit Martin's old case. Meanwhile, David remains on the run in the United States, despite his face appearing in newspaper headlines. Rachel fears the publicity could place Matthew in greater danger, especially after a former editor publishes the story. As the FBI intensifies its search for David, Hayden faces pressure from his mother, Gertrude, who is determined to shield her family from scandal. She prepares a report that clears Hayden of wrongdoing while placing responsibility on Rachel. To avoid capture, David and Rachel use an underground tunnel connected to Lenny's childhood home. When they arrive, Lenny is missing. Sophie later reveals that Lenny has colon cancer and had been receiving treatment, but she cannot explain where he has gone. Sophie reveals that Ronald fabricated a bus accident to lure Cheryl to the hospital on the night Matthew vanished. Before they can discuss it further, Williams and Greer arrive. David and Rachel hide, while the agents search the house and discover files connected to Liam Fisher. Sophie eventually admits Lenny is at the hospital, leading Williams to accuse her of obstructing the investigation. After the agents leave, David decides to track down Nikki Fisher while Rachel investigates Ronald's lies. David meets Adam, who unsuccessfully tries to stop him from confronting Nikki's daughter, Lena. David storms into Lena's home and forces her to contact her father. Nikki calmly tells him to lower his weapon, but moments later, Skunk and several armed men ambush him. Lena uses a taser, knocking David unconscious. Elsewhere, Rachel confronts Ronald at the hospital. Under pressure, he admits he lied about the accident. He claims he only wanted an excuse to see Cheryl and never expected the events that followed. Cheryl struggles with guilt, believing she might have prevented Matthew's disappearance if she had gone home earlier. Rachel then reveals the photograph, proving Matthew may still be alive. As investigators dig deeper, Sophie admits she believes Nikki Fisher took both Matthew and Lenny. Greer uncovers evidence that Liam Fisher had been arrested years earlier by Lenny and Philip before dying in prison, giving the Pfizer family a possible motive for revenge. Rachel discovers that Payne Industries privately rented an entire amusement park on the day Matthew was photographed there. She asks Hayden to examine company photographs for clues. Gertrude learns of Hayden's involvement and insists he must never discover the truth. David eventually realizes Adam has been working for Nikki Fisher. The FBI races to a private airstrip where David and Adam attempt to stop Nikki's operation. A violent gunfight breaks out. Williams is shot by Skunk, but Greer kills Skunk before he can fire again. Despite their efforts, the plane escapes. When David regains consciousness, he finds himself in Key West, Florida. Waiting for him is Nikki Fisher, who greets him with a punch, and we see a flashback to 10 years earlier when Nikki Fisher is called to identify the body of his son, Liam. The loss explains the bitterness that continues to drive many of his actions in the present. In Florida, David wakes after Nikki punches him and is brought to an empty restaurant along the waterfront. There he discovers that Lenny is alive. Nikki finally explains his side of the story, insisting that Liam's criminal charges were close to being dismissed until Lenny and Philip intervened, leading to Liam's imprisonment and eventual death. Since then, Nikki has blamed them for everything and spent years seeking revenge. He forces David into an impossible position, demanding that he choose between saving Lenny or Matthew. Back in Boston, Greer waits anxiously while her father undergoes surgery after being shot. The FBI has lost track of Nikki's plane, and Greer is frustrated when she is removed from the investigation. However, a call from Detective Mueller provides a new lead connected to the growing mystery. Meanwhile, the truth about Adam's relationship with Nikki comes to light. After Liam's death, Nikki wanted Lenny and Philip killed, but Adam convinced him otherwise. In exchange for sparing them, Adam secretly supplied Nikki with information from inside law enforcement for years. When David refuses to choose between his father and son, Nikki orders both men executed. Before anyone can act, Adam turns his gun on Nikki. Lenny then urges David to sacrifice him, arguing that his cancer will kill him anyway. David reluctantly agrees, but Nikki reveals the threat was only a test. He wanted proof that David had no involvement in Matthew's disappearance. Nikki claims he never kidnapped Matthew. Instead, he believes Matthew was deliberately targeted by someone else. He advises David to examine Cheryl's past because the answers may begin there. Rachel continues reviewing photographs from Six Flags and contacts the photographer for additional images. Cheryl joins her and finally commits to helping uncover the truth. As David returns to Boston, he shares Nikki's theory and admits he's begun wondering whether Matthew is actually his biological son. Years earlier, he and Cheryl struggled to conceive, and he suspects she may have secretly used a fertility clinic. Nikki keeps Lenny in Florida as leverage while sending David home. Adam promises to protect him. Danger closes in on Rachel. An assassin sent by Gertrude's organization breaks into her apartment. Rachel manages to alert police by throwing a trophy through a window and then fights her attacker long enough to escape. During the confrontation, one officer is killed. Rachel flees with Hayden, who offers to help her stay hidden while continuing the search for Matthew. As investigators swarm the crime scene, Detective Stavros falsely blames David for the officer's death. News reports quickly spread the accusation, while Hayden is identified as Rachel's accomplice. Cheryl later provides a lock of Matthew's hair so DNA testing can be performed. The investigation leads them to Berg Reproductive, the clinic Cheryl once visited. The facility is owned by Payne Medical Group, linking it directly to Hayden's family. Hayden remembers a scandal from years earlier involving a doctor named Jacob Heller. The physician had been accused of secretly using his own sperm to impregnate patients, and Hayden's mother helped bury the controversy. Heller left under a confidentiality agreement and now works alongside Cheryl at Boston General. Before they can pursue the lead, police arrive at the clinic. Hayden creates a distraction, allowing David and Rachel to escape. Stavros secretly contacts Jacob Heller and warns him to disappear before David reaches him. A flashback to 5 years in the past shows Dr. Heller meets with Gertrude Payne shortly after discussions involving David's arrest and the falsified DNA evidence that supposedly proved Matthew was dead. Heller hands over documents connected to the scheme, and Gertrude immediately destroys them in her fireplace, eliminating any trace that could lead back to her. In the present, David and Rachel seek help from Ronald. Although he remains bitter over the damage caused to his relationship with Cheryl, they need his connection to Boston General Hospital in order to reach Dr. Heller. At the same time, Heller hurriedly deletes files from his computer and prepares to leave town. Meanwhile, Greer becomes interested in why David and Rachel broke into Berg Reproductive. Detective Mueller approaches her with new information and reveals that he believes Martin's disappearance in Switzerland is tied directly to Matthew's case. He discovers that the orphanage Martin lived in was funded by the Payne Foundation. Martin suffered from a rare disease called MLDD, and Mueller believes DNA evidence could prove Martin died while Matthew survived. Hayden, still in custody, receives a visit from his mother's attorney. He refuses to sign the agreement Gertrude has arranged for him. Rachel convinces Ronald to secretly help her, and David enter the hospital. At the hospital, Greer hacks into Berg's systems to examine the records David searched. She is surprised to discover he was investigating Cheryl rather than Matthew. Determined to understand why, she heads off to question Cheryl, while Mueller continues tracing financial links between Gertrude and Rage Holdings. Hayden eventually accepts the deal offered by his mother and calls Rachel. He tells her he is heading to the Payne estate and admits that he loves her. Meanwhile, Ronald sneaks David and Rachel into a private room before setting out to locate Heller himself. Ronald finally catches up with Heller and pressures him about Berg Reproductive. Before Heller can reveal anything, Cheryl unexpectedly arrives and interrupts the conversation. At the FBI, Williams faces criticism for authorizing a new DNA test on Matthew's remains. Despite the pressure, he refuses to back down. Soon after, Cheryl joins David and Rachel in their hiding place. She apologizes to David and finally reveals the truth. Years earlier, she did proceed with fertility treatment, but Heller was not involved. Another doctor handled the procedure. However, the following morning, she took a pregnancy test and discovered she was already pregnant. The revelation means David was Matthew's biological father all along, explaining why Cheryl kept her visit to Berg secret. Greer arrives at the hospital and encounters Ronald. When he refuses to reveal Cheryl's location, Greer arrests him for obstructing the investigation. At the same time, Mueller visits the Payne estate where Gertrude and Hayden are both stunned when he presents his theory linking Martin's disappearance to Matthew's case. He lays out the growing evidence against Gertrude and even mentions suspicious Cayman Islands accounts. He notices a portrait of Gertrude's father, Robert Edward Harold Payne. Realizing his initials match RH despite warnings from Williams, Greer continues pursuing leads. Cheryl reveals her bird file was created under Rachel's name to hide her identity. David suddenly realizes Cheryl was never the intended target. Rachel was. After reviewing the evidence, Rachel discovers photographs that confirm Hayden was involved in Matthew's abduction. Meanwhile, confronted by Mueller's investigation and the truth closing in, Hayden kills Mueller with a rock. Next, we see a flashback to the night Matthew was taken. Hayden brings the boy to the Payne estate after the abduction, setting in motion the conspiracy that would remain hidden for years. In the present, Hayden cleans himself up after killing Mueller and checks on Matthew, now living under the name Theo. He tells the teenager to prepare for a sudden departure. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Greer confronts David, Rachel, and Cheryl at gunpoint. After hearing everything they have uncovered, she finally admits the truth. Matthew was kidnapped, and the body identified years earlier was not his. At the Payne estate, Gertrude reassures Hayden that killing Mueller was necessary to draw Rachel to them. They leak a false report claiming David has been arrested. Believing Hayden may still help her, Rachel contacts him and is invited to the estate. Once there, Hayden insists he cannot protect her, but Rachel continues pushing him while secretly searching for a way to expose the truth. Rachel eventually convinces Hayden that they should leave together. While pretending to go along with the plan, she slips away long enough to send a message to Greer, revealing her location. At the hospital, Cheryl updates Williams on everything that has happened and presents DNA evidence proving Matthew survived and David was innocent all along. Williams agrees to help despite orders to stay away from the investigation. When Stavros discovers David was never arrested, Gertrude and Hayden realize Rachel has deceived them. Expecting David to arrive, they prepare to eliminate him. Greer and David approach the estate through the surrounding woods, avoiding detection. David persuades Greer to remove his handcuffs so he can help rescue Matthew. Inside the mansion, Hayden kisses Rachel before discovering the message she sent from her phone. Outside, armed guards open fire on Greer and David as they make their way toward the house. While Greer exchanges gunfire with the guards, David manages to slip inside. Cornered by Rachel, Hayden finally reveals everything. Years earlier, he believed Rachel had secretly visited Bird Reproductive to have a child without him. Because Cheryl used Rachel's name, Hayden became convinced the future child belonged to him. He arranged for himself to be the donor and later met Matthew at a 4th of July celebration. From that moment, he became obsessed with claiming the boy as his son. Hayden also confesses that he killed Martin and used the boy's body to fake Matthew's death, framing David in the process. Gertrude enters the room. Moments later, David breaks into the house. Stavros follows with a gun, but Greer shoots him before he can fire. Hearing the shot, Gertrude mistakenly assumes David has been killed. Rachel then reveals the truth. Matthew was never Hayden's son because Cheryl had already become pregnant by David before any fertility treatment could occur. Gertrude had known this for years and deliberately hid the paternity results from Hayden. Realizing his mother manipulated him, Hayden turns his gun on Gertrude and kills her. Upstairs, David and Greer finally locate Matthew. Father and son are reunited after years apart. They begin leading him to safety, but Hayden intercepts them outside. Holding Rachel hostage, he demands Matthew be returned to him. Matthew pleads with Hayden, but Hayden forces him into a car and attempts to flee. Greer shoots out the tires, bringing the vehicle to a stop. Hayden abandons the car and disappears into the woods with Matthew nearby. Matthew hides among the trees as Hayden searches for him. David catches up and tackles Hayden, leading to a violent struggle. During the fight, Hayden shoots David in the abdomen. Greer arrives and fatally shoots him. Rachel rushes to David's side as he loses consciousness. The story then jumps forward 8 months. David survives his injuries, and the truth about Matthew's disappearance becomes public through Rachel's book, Found. Adam starts a private investigation business. Greer takes over many of her father's responsibilities following his retirement. Cheryl and Ronald reunite and welcome a daughter together. Lenny eventually passes away, and Matthew struggles with grief during the memorial gathering. Despite everything they endured, he and David have begun rebuilding their relationship. David and Rachel stand together, holding hands as they look toward the future.